The perfume of stale coffee and burnt bacon grease was the signature scent of Esther Bowmont's life. At 26, it clung to her hair, her cheap polyester uniform, and the weary lines around her eyes, a constant, pungent reminder of a life far removed from the one she had once dreamed of. She worked at the Astor Diner on Manhattan's Upper East Side, a place that, much like its name, pretended to be grander than it was. It had polished brass railings that were perpetually smudged and red vinyl booths cracked like old leather. It was a purgatory for the city's aspiring artists, actors, and, in Esther's case, forgotten scholars. Each morning, she would tie her frayed apron, paste on a smile that rarely reached her eyes, and become Esther the waitress, efficient, polite, and almost invisible. Her colleagues, her customers, no one would ever have guessed that 4 years ago she had been a top student at the Sorbonne in Paris, a life painted in the vibrant colors of her dreams. She could dissect the semiotics of Renaissance art and debate French existentialist philosophy with the best of them. But a single phone call, her father's heart attack, the collapse of his small construction business, the mountainous debt, had shattered that vibrant world. Her dream dissolved overnight. She flew home, leaving behind the cobblestone streets of the Latin Quarter for the cramped pavement of a tiny Queen's apartment. Paris became a ghost, a painful whisper of a life that belonged to someone else. The lunch rush was a symphony of chaos, the roar of Saul the cook, the sizzle of the griddle, the clatter of plates. Esther navigated it with a practiced grace, her mind a million miles away, lost in the ghost of a city she could no longer afford to visit. Her nemesis today was a man named Mr. Henderson, a preening caricature of old money arrogance who had already sent back his orange juice for having too much pulp. He was trying desperately to impress his much younger date, snapping his fingers and loudly specifying, "And make sure the steak is medium rare, sweetheart. Not medium, not rare. If it bleeds, I'm sending it back. If it's gray, I'm sending it back. Got it?" Esther had just smiled, a mechanical gesture of service. "Perfectly clear, sir." Amidst the familiar, soul-crushing routine, her eyes briefly scanned the room. In the far corner booth sat a man who was different. He wasn't on his phone or trying to be seen. Dressed in a simple dark gray cashmere sweater, his presence was quiet but powerful. There was no flashy watch, no obvious display of wealth, but the cut of his clothes and the quiet intensity in his gaze spoke of a different world. He nursed a single black coffee and watched her with an analytical, almost unnerving focus. Esther had pegged him as a writer or a professor, he had an air of quiet contemplation about him. She was unaware that he was not just a spectator, he was a silent observer, a connoisseur of human potential. Just as Esther was about to retrieve bottled water for the endlessly complaining Mr. Henderson, the diner door chimed. An elderly woman, flustered and out of place, clutched her handbag, her eyes wide as she scanned the chaotic room. Her elegant but simple clothes suggested a tourist who had taken a wrong turn off Madison Avenue. She approached a young host, a teenager named Kevin, who was struggling with the seating chart. "A table? S'il vous plaît," she asked, her English heavily accented and uncertain. Kevin stared at her blankly. "A what?" he mumbled. Growing more distressed, the woman tried again, this time in a rapid-fire stream of French, explaining that she was lost, her phone battery was dead, and she was supposed to meet her tour group at the Met. Kevin just shook his head. "Sorry, lady. I don't speak, whatever that is." From his table, Mr. Henderson let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Let a man of culture handle this." He stood, puffing out his chest as he approached the woman. "Bonjour, madame," he said, his accent a grotesque caricature. Esther felt a hot flush of second-hand embarrassment. Henderson was butchering the language, turning its beautiful lyricism into a clumsy assault on the ears. It was more than his terrible French, it was his arrogance, his smug satisfaction in making a spectacle of this lost woman, the same condescension he'd shown her all afternoon. Something inside her snapped. The part of her that remembered strolling along the Seine and debating Foucault finally rebelled. She placed her tray down, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached the elderly woman. The man in the corner booth, Alexander Sterling, leaned forward just so slightly, his coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Esther looked at the woman and smiled gently. Then she spoke, and the voice that came out was not the tired, flat voice of a New York waitress. It was a voice from another life, as smooth and clear as a bell, speaking flawless, Paris. The room seemed to fall silent around them. Henderson's jaw went slack. His date stared at Esther with wide, disbelieving eyes. Esther looked at the woman and smiled gently. Pardonnez-moi pour l'interruption, madame. You seem lost. May I help you? She said, her voice a calm, reassuring contrast to the diner's usual cacophony. The French woman's face, however, lit up with profound relief. Oh, mon Dieu, oui, she exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest. She launched into her story again, but this time, the words found a safe harbor. She explained her confusion about the museums, her dead phone, her worry that her tour group would leave without her. Esther listened patiently, nodding and offering reassuring words, her body language a stark contrast to the dismissive indifference of the other customers. Ne vous en faites pas, madame. Everything will be all right. Esther calmly took charge, getting the woman a glass of water, calling her tour guide, and writing down clear directions to a taxi stand. Madame Dubois, as her name turned out to be, was effusive in her gratitude, pressing a crumpled $20 bill into Esther's hand, which Esther gently refused. Bon voyage, madame. It was my pleasure, she said, her smile genuine and warm. As Madame Dubois left, a sense of quiet satisfaction settled over Esther. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself again. She had forgotten what that felt like. She went to clear Henderson's table, expecting him to be gone. He was, but he had left a paltry $1 tip on a $100 bill, a final, spiteful act. She wasn't surprised. What did surprise her was that the man in the corner booth was also getting up to leave. He caught her eye as he slid on a tailored navy blue coat, giving her a small, almost imperceptible nod of profound appraisal. He left a crisp $100 bill on his table for a $3 coffee and walked out without a word. Esther pocketed the generous tip, a small thrill of victory bubbling up inside her. She thought that was th. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of routine. When her shift finally ended at 5 p.m., she felt the familiar ache in her feet and the deeper ache in her soul. Hey, Beaumont. She turned. It was Saul, the cook, wiping his hands on his greasy apron. He was holding a sleek black envelope. The quiet guy, the one in the corner booth. He came back a few minutes ago, said he forgot to give this to you. Told me to make sure you got it personally. Esther frowned, taking the envelope. It was made of heavy, expensive cardstock, unlike anything she'd ever held. There was no name on it, just a simple, elegant silver seal holding it closed, the stylized wings of a falcon. She stumbled home in a daze, the black envelope clutched in her hand like a talisman. When she burst into her tiny Queens apartment, her friend and roommate, Maya, was on the couch. Whoa, you look like you've seen a ghost, Maya said, looking up. Esther didn't speak. She just walked over and laid the contents of the envelope on the coffee table, the business card, the jet ticket, and the note. Maya picked up the card. Sterling Innovations. Isn't that? Her eyes widened. She read the note, then looked at the ticket. She looked back at Esther, her mouth agape. What is this? I don't know, Esther whispered, sinking onto the couch. He was there. The guy who left the $100 tip. Maya's initial shock quickly morphed into deep-seated suspicion. A paralegal, she was pragmatic and protective by nature. Okay, hold on. A strange billionaire leaves you a private jet ticket to Paris, Esther? This is every red flag in the book. This is how horror movies start. This is human trafficking. Some kind of weird creepy pretty woman fantasy. Maya's warnings were logical. But beneath the fear, something else was stirring in Esther. A wild, dangerous hope. Paris. The word alone was a physical ache in her chest. The ticket on the table wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a doorway back to the life that had been stolen from her. It was a chance. It was everything. What if it's real? Esther asked, her voice barely a whisper. What if it's just an opportunity, like he said? And what if it's a trap? You throw away your job, your life here, on the whim of a man you met for 5 seconds, for a cryptic note? Maya retorted, her arms crossed. Esther looked around the cramped apartment, at the peeling paint, the stack of overdue bills. She thought of her uniform hanging by the door, smelling of grease. This was her reality. It was safe, predictable, and it was slowly suffocating her. The note said, "This is not a request." It felt like a command, but also a challenge. A challenge to be more than what she had become. The fear was real, but the pull of Paris was stronger. "I think I have to go," Esther said. "I have to know." The next morning was a whirlwind of anxiety and adrenaline. Esther called the diner and quit, her voice shaking as she left a message for her manager. Packing was a surreal experience. What does one pack for a clandestine trip to Paris offered by a reclusive billionaire? Her entire wardrobe consisted of worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and a single black dress. She stuffed them into her old, scuffed suitcase, feeling foolish and hopelessly out of her depth. Maya watched her, a storm of worry on her face. "I've put a tracking app on your phone. Don't you dare turn it off," Maya said. "And I want you to check in with me every 3 hours. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling the embassy, the gendarmerie, the CIA. I swear to God." Esther hugged her friend tightly, grateful for her fierce, pragmatic loyalty. At precisely 10 a.m., a sleek, silent black Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan pulled up to their apartment building. A chauffeur in a crisp suit stepped out and opened the rear door. "Miss Bowmont, we are ready when you are." The ride to Teterboro Airport was silent and smooth. They didn't go to the main terminal, but to a private executive hangar. There, gleaming on the tarmac, was the Gulfstream G650. It was a vision of power and grace, larger and more imposing than she could have ever imagined. A flight attendant with a warm smile greeted her at the steps. "Welcome aboard, Miss Bowmont. Mr. Sterling has arranged everything for your comfort." The interior of the jet was a study in understated luxury, cream leather seats, polished mahogany wood, and subtle silver accents that echoed the falcon crest. She was the only passenger. As the jet climbed steeply into the clouds, Esther's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the point of no return. Below her, New York City shrank, the diner, her apartment, her old life, all of it vanishing into a haze. 7 hours later, the dream continued. As the jet began its descent, the lights of Paris emerged from the darkness below, a glittering carpet of gold and silver. A lump formed in Esther's throat. She was back. After 4 years of yearning, she was finally home. They landed at Le Bourget, the private airport north of the city. There was no customs line, no baggage claim chaos. She was escorted directly to another waiting car, which drove through the streets of Paris, past familiar landmarks that made her heart ache with a bittersweet nostalgia. The car, however, didn't stop at a hotel. It pulled up to a magnificent Hotel Particulier, a grand private Parisian mansion in the 16th arrondissement. A palace of limestone and slate. "Welcome to Mr. Sterling's Parisian residence, Miss Beaumont," the chauffeur said. Her legs felt weak as she walked up the stone steps. Standing in the grand, marble-floored foyer was Alexander Sterling. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater, just as he had been in the diner. Up close, she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his sharp, intelligent eyes. He was younger than she had thought, perhaps in his late 30s. Miss Beaumont, he said, his voice a calm, low baritone. Welcome to Paris. I trust your flight was comfortable. Yes, thank you, she stammered, feeling small and out of place. Mr. Sterling, I don't understand any of this. I know, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. Clarity is the purpose of your visit. But first, you must be exhausted. We can talk in the morning. He hadn't explained a thing. The mystery, she realized, was only getting deeper. This was not a gift. It was a prelude. The next morning, after waking up to the most exquisite breakfast she'd ever had, Esther found Alexander in a vast, book-lined study. I appreciate the flight and the accommodations, but I need to know why I'm here, she began, her voice firmer than she expected. This is abnormal. I appreciate your directness, he said, setting his transparent tablet aside. You are here, Miss Beaumont, because I am in need of a very specific skill set. A skill set I believe you possess, despite your current employment. Before he could elaborate, the study doors opened. A woman entered, tall, impossibly chic, radiating an aura of intimidating authority. Alexander, you're late for the Lefebvre preliminary, she said, her voice crisp and laced with an accent that was a hybrid of British boarding school and American corporate law. Her eyes, the same piercing gray as Alexander's, swept over Esther with a cool, dismissive glance. Is this her? The waitress? Alexander introduced them. Esther Bowmont, this is my sister, Isabel Sterling. She's the chief operating officer of Sterling Innovations. Isabel offered a smile that was as sharp and... Isabel turned her gaze back to Esther. My brother has a penchant for seeing potential in the most unlikely of places. He seems to think that because you can speak French, you can solve a multi-billion-dollar problem for us. Esther's head was spinning. A multi-billion-dollar problem? Alexander finally offered an explanation. Sterling Innovations is in the final stages of acquiring a company, a French company. Maison Lefebvre. Esther knew the name. It was a legendary Parisian luxury house, a bastion of old-world craftsmanship and French heritage. Lefebvre is family-owned, Alexander continued. It has been for 8 generations, and the current matriarch, Genevieve Lefebvre, is resistant to the acquisition. We've sent teams of the best lawyers and negotiators in the world, and they've all failed. They don't speak her language. And I don't mean French, Isabel interjected, her tone dripping with skepticism. They don't speak the language of nuance, of culture, of respect for tradition. Genevieve Lefebvre slammed the door on our last M&A head because he wore white sneakers to a meeting. You need a translator, Esther stated. No, Alexander said, leaning forward. I need more than that. I need a bridge. I need someone who understands the subtlety of French culture, who can show respect for their heritage, but who also understands the directness and ambition of the American mindset. Someone who can navigate both worlds. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. In the diner, I didn't just see a waitress speaking French. I saw a woman of intelligence and grace handle a difficult, arrogant man with poise. Then I saw her treat a lost, frightened woman with compassion and empathy, using flawless colloquial French, not to show off, but to genuinely connect and help. That combination, poise under pressure, cultural fluency, and genuine empathy, is rarer than you can imagine. It cannot be taught in a business school. Isabel let out a quiet, impatient sigh. It's a romantic notion, Alexander. But this is a $2.7 billion acquisition, not a social experiment. Miss Beaumont has no corporate experience, no background in finance or law. She served pie yesterday. The insult landed like a physical blow, but Esther held her ground. She refused to let this woman diminish her. What did you do when you weren't a waitress? Isabel pressed, her eyes narrowing. What hidden talents did my brother unearth with his little private investigation? The question confirmed Esther's fears. He had investigated her. I was a student, Esther said, her voice steady. Here at the Sorbonne. I studied art history and French cultural studies. I had to leave before I could finish my degree due to a family emergency. So, you're a college dropout, Isabelle stated flatly. Here is the situation, Miss Bowmont, Alexander said, shooting a warning look at his sister. This is a job interview. I want you to be part of the team meeting with Genevieve Lefebvre and her family. I don't want you to negotiate finances. I want you to listen, to observe, to build a bridge where we have only found walls. And if I succeed? Esther asked. If you help us secure this deal, Alexander said, I will create a position for you at this company. Director of Cultural Integration for our European acquisitions. A salary that will solve any family debt you might have, and a career that utilizes your actual talents. I will also fund the completion of your degree. It was an offer that was beyond comprehension, a lifeline, not just to solvency, but to a life she thought was lost forever. And if I fail? Isabelle answered before Alexander could. A car will take you back to Le Bourget, and you will be on the next flight back to New York. You can have your old job back at the diner. The meeting with Madame Lefebvre was a disaster until Esther spoke. She walked not toward the negotiating table but toward a painting on the wall. This is a beautiful piece, she said in perfect French. The brushwork reminds me of Fragonard, but it's more intimate. Is it a family piece? Genevieve Lefebvre's austere expression softened for the first time. It is a portrait of my great-great-great-grandmother, she said, a note of pride in her voice. Esther had used the word art. She had connected the present to the past. She had shown that she saw not just a brand but a story. The meeting ended with a second invitation. Perhaps we can have tea next week, just you and me. And you will bring Mademoiselle Bowmont. The deal was signed a week later, with Esther acting as the bridge, translating not just their words but their intent. The night it was finalized, Alexander hosted a celebration. Esther stood on the balcony of her room, a different person from the weary waitress who had stepped off that plane. The offer is on the table, he said, turning to face her. Director of Cultural Integration, a very generous salary, a housing allowance, and a blank check for your education. It's yours. Thank you, she said, her heart pounding. It's an incredible offer. But I have a counterproposal. Alexander raised an eyebrow. I don't want the job as a gift. And I don't want you to pay for my degree. I want you to invest in me. Not as an employee you discovered, but as a partner you value. I want to run the Maison Lefebvre integration as the project lead. Give me a budget and a team, and if I succeed in doubling its digital presence while maintaining brand integrity in 2 years, I get a real stake in the subsidiary. And I'll pay for my own degree with the salary you give me. Alexander Sterling stared at her, his analytical gaze replaced by one of genuine surprise, which slowly morphed into a broad, brilliant smile. I knew my instincts were right about you, Esther Bowmont. I just had no idea how right. He extended his hand. You have a deal. Welcome to Sterling Innovations. Esther shook his hand, a current of electricity passing between them. It wasn't just a handshake. It was a contract. She was no longer a waitress who spoke French. She was a woman who had found her voice, in more ways than one.